So the tabletop technique is a different way of achieving the same sorts of stitches that you've been arm knitting with, but because you're not limited to the number of stitches that you can fit onto your forearm, you've actually got an unlimited number of stitches that you can create the width of your project with. So essentially you begin the same way. You create a slip knot, and you don't have to measure off a tail or anything like that. You just create a slip knot to begin with, and you're going to actually be working with your fingers to make the stitches. You may have seen videos where you make these loops big enough that your whole hand goes through them, but I think that results in a much larger, kind of baggier stitch, so you end up with more of a cargo net kind of effect, with lots of gaps between the stitches. So what I recommend is to have your starting loop to be about as tall as your index finger, so about 3 to 3.5 inches tall, like that. And then what you need to decide is how wide you want to create your blanket. So what we'll be doing is creating what's called a chain. So we're going to put our thumb and forefinger of our dominant hand, so I'm right-handed, so into there, facing the direction of the ball of yarn that I've got over here on the left. And you're going to pick up the working yarn and pull up through that first loop another loop of the same size. And you'll see that it comes up vertically. Okay, so it pops up vertically out of that original loop, and what we're going to do is just give it a twist to lay it flat like that. And what we're doing is effectively the cast on row. Okay, so this is what we would cast onto our arms, but here we're just going to be doing it on the table. So I'm going to pull up another loop, give it a twist and lay it flat, and we'll continue like that. And you can go literally as wide as you want to. So if you think that each stitch is about 3 inches, that will help you decide how wide or how many stitches you need to do. So you just divide your in inches, if it was, you divide your eventual blanket width by 3 in inches, and it will tell you how many stitches you need to make. So I'm just going to do a few just so that you can see on the camera. What we're creating. So there we go. So imagine I'm only doing a very short one here, but you could go on forever. I mean, you don't have any need to limit the size really, as long as you've got a space or a table or a clean floor area where you can work. You can make something really quite large, say to completely cover a king-size bed if you wanted to. Okay, so when you've completed the distance or the width of your work, your project, then you're basically going to angle this last loop here. You're going to angle it upwards, because what we're going to be doing is working in this direction. Okay, we're going to be working upwards, and so what you'll need to do is to keep moving your working yarn so that it's kind of ahead of you the whole time. So we're going to be traveling it back along here. So to make the next stitch of this row, so this forms the very first stitch of this row, okay, and now we're going to move along. Now if you see, each of these chain stitches here have a top loop and a bottom loop. We're working into the top loops, and we're going to just open up that, take our thumb and forefinger again, pop it through and collect the working yarn that's at the top there, and pull up another loop the same size. And these loops are just happy sort of hanging out. They don't need fixing or tying down or anything like that. They're just quite happy hanging like that. And then you move along to the next one, next top loop. So all of these bars that you see at the top here, you just move on to the next one. Fingers go in, collect the yarn at the back and pull up another loop. This one will always feel like it wants to go that way, so we'll forgive it for now because we will grab it shortly when we do the next row afterwards, but it doesn't matter if it keeps going at a wonky angle. So you continue along, pulling up the loops. So keeping the loops the same size is the aim of the game, okay? Because we want a nice even blanket. And you carry on until you get to the end, so we're almost there. So this is where, if you've got dry hands, moisturize before you start, because dry hands can almost catch or create a bit of friction with the yarn, I've noticed. So I've got to the end here because this very last bit is the knot. So we can ignore that. And now we're moving back in the opposite direction. So if we just lay the yarn out in front like that, then we're going back into this last loop of this row in order to create the first loop of the next row. So now, rather than searching for this sort of half of a chain, we can go into the loops we've already made. So we put our fingers through, collect the yarn at the back and pull up a loop the same size, and then we move into the next one. Fingers go in, collect the yarn, pull up another loop the same size, and we'll just continue along. And just as with arm knitting, you need to continue to keep unraveling your ball ahead of time so that it's not pulling back at you, because you'll suddenly find that your stitches start shrinking a little bit after you've made them because the ball isn't unraveled and it's tugging back towards the other direction. So here we go. So now we're coming back to our little rogue one over here that doesn't want to stay straight, so we're going to pop a new loop through there. Okay, so you can start to see we've got our nice cast on row at the bottom, and now you can start to see this row of sort of the V-shaped knit stitches that we are familiar with from the arm knitting. You will find that the stitches will be that bit closer together, tighter, because obviously the size of these loops is smaller than the loops that you're working with around your wrist. So I'll just do one more row to show you the full effect. So we go back into the end one that you've just done to create the next one. I've noticed I've actually just switched hands to collect the yarn with my fingers. It's a very, when you get into the rhythm of something, you find your own way. So if you find yourself switching hands, that's totally okay. Okay. So you can really start to see the shape of the stitches now, and how much closer they are together than the arm knitting. Okay, so when you get to the point where you've reached, let's imagine we've reached the end of the blanket, this is where you need to cast off. So to cast off, what we're going to do is knit one like that, and then we are going to pop it through, pick it up and pop it through the one next door, like that. Okay, so let's imagine you have reached the top edge of your blanket and you now want to cast off these stitches that are hanging loose here. So what you're going to do is you're going to knit the first two, so 1, 2, like that, and then you're going to basically take the second one and you're going to feed it through the first, like that, and then we're going to knit the next one along, like that, and then take the one you've just made and pop it through the previous one like that. Can you see? So these stitches are getting locked closed, and then we move along to the next one again, pull up the loop, and then feed that new loop through the previous one like that. Just unravel a little bit more. So you need to allow, I would probably say, twice the width of your blanket in yarn at the end. If you measure that off, and make sure when you're working that you don't, you could tie a little bit of string around the end of it, or at that point, to make sure you don't actually use that last bit of yarn up, because you will need it. So we're going to just knit that last one like that and pop it through the previous one. There we go. So that's all nice and neat. And now then you would just snip here, feed that piece through, and just pull it tight to fasten a knot into the corner there. Okay, so there we have it. That would be, obviously this is very tiny, but you get the idea. Now then, what I will show you, I'm just going to undo that cast off, is how to start to make a ribbed blanket with using this method. So for the knit stitches, what we've been doing is putting our fingers, diving down through the loops and picking up the yarn and pulling it up through like that. If you wanted to create a ribbed blanket, so that's, you get a different texture of stitch, so you'd have a knit stitch and then a purl stitch, like a couple of rows of each perhaps. Then to do a purl stitch, you actually want to bring your yarn over the top, and you're going to, from underneath, grab hold of that yarn and pull it up through. And as you can see, it creates a little bar across. So we go to the next one, fingers from underneath, collect the yarn from on top and pull it through. Okay, we go to underneath, we collect the yarn that's on the top and pull it through. So you can see that creates a lovely purl, that's called a purl bump in knitting, so that you'll see that there, and you'll collect the next one. And you can go, you can do a couple of rows of each, you can do 3 of each. It's nice, you can do sort of 5 or 6 knit and just 2 purl to make a little narrow ridge across your blanket. It's up to you. So you can create a nice effect by alternating these 2 stitches. And there we have it.